All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. First of all, to acknowledge that we are dedicating our Daf Yomi share, our share for Bava Kamma Hashem, in the zechus of Master Sergeant Eliyahu Michael Harush, who was killed, one of the first officers killed in the firefight in sderot. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, his neshama shav and aliya and his family a neshama. We thank all of our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Cheshvan. Czinn for dedicating all those families who dedicated all the shiurim and drushos this month. Teri Czinn in loving memory of Steve's father. Bunim Tzvi ben Chaim, Leah Sol as a zechus refuah sheleimah for her daughter Ilana bas Esther, and for the wounded of Eretz Yisroel. Yonason Rachel Wolff for a complete and lasting refuah for Refuel Yitzchak Baruch ben Esther, Zecharya and Sora Wolasky, and Refuel Yitzchak for their grandson Zecharya Dov ben Perel Shira, and Azriel and Iris Miller in the zechus of our holy soldiers of the IDF, and on the merit of our brothers and sisters of Eretz Yisroel. I will say with that, we thank all of our sponsors for all of their incredible generosity, and let us begin. A lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. So today's daf is Zion 7. But we are picking up, and there's been a lot to do today. We are picking up in Eretz Hashem at the 2 dots on Vav Amud Beis. And when I say 2 dots, the upper 2 dots, or the middle 2 dots, says the Gemara. Let's just start again from here, because we very quickly did this machlokes at the end of yesterday's shir, but it's an incredibly important machlokes that is going to carry the bulk of our conversation for today. So TORAH, Gemara says as follows: Meitav Sadeh Meitav Yishalim. Torah tells us that when Reuven damages Shimon, so the halacha is that Reuven has to pay Meitav Sadeh from the best of his field and the best of his vineyard. So the Gemara says Meitav Sadeh Shel Mizak or Meitav Shel Mizak Teri Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel says when we speak about the best of the land, Meitav Sadeh Meitav Karmo, whose best are we referring to? Rabbi Shmuel says it's referring to the best of the damaged party. That I will say, now remember, as I mentioned yesterday, the havamina of that is that what would happen is, imagine Reuven damages Shimon. What we would do is, we would look at the best row of produce in Shimon's property and go ahead and assess how much was it worth with produce, how much is it without produce, and that difference ultimately is the amount of damage that Reuven, the damager, has to pay. Rabbi Akiva says no. Rabbi Akiva Omer lo ba'chasu al ligvos and zakin mina idis the kal v'chomer lahektish. Rabbi Akiva disagrees, and we'll discuss the depth of that disagreement in just a moment. And Rabbi Akiva says no, that's not what the pasuk is coming to teach me. The pasuk is coming to teach me that damages is payable from idis, from best property, highest grade property, and it's a kal v'chomer from hektish. What that kal v'chomer is, we'll have to see. So the Gemara is like this. So let me get this straight. Back to Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel holds that we assess damages through the lens of the damaged party. So the Gemara says, let me get this straight. So Rabbi Shmuel, Achol Shmeina Mashalim Shmeina. So Rabbi Shmuel, Reuven's ox comes in and eats a row of produce of Shimon's field, the best produce in the field. Okay, so eat the best produce. What do you pay back? The value of the best produce. Achal kachusha b'shalim shmeina. According to what we said before, according to Shmuel, even if the animal ate inferior produce, he would still repay what? Superior produce. That doesn't make any sense. We'll say the law of damages is you pay what you damaged. But if he consumed inferior produce, why would he be on the hook for superior produce? Amar v'divar avin achama askin on what's the case here? Kilo sha'achol aruga ben ha'arugos. V'lo yadinon ikechusha achol ish shemena achol. The mishalim shemena. To which Raviti Barab said, no. What's the case? The case is where Reuven's animal came into Shimon's field, consumed a row of produce. What don't we know? We don't know. Did he consume superior produce or inferior produce? That's the case that Rabbi Shmuel is commenting on. And Rabbi Shmuel says in that case, we would make Reuven pay back the superior produce. The Gemara says, still, it doesn't make sense. Amarava, Uma idu yadinan, tekechusha achal lo elekechusha. If we knew that Reuven's animal came in and only consumed inferior produce, he would be on the hook to pay for inferior produce. Hashta de lo yadinan, ikechush achal, ishmena achal, mishalim shmena. So tell me over here in this case, where Reuven's animal came in and we don't know, did the animal consume superior produce or inferior produce? We're going to make Reuven pay for superior produce? That doesn't make any sense. Hamotz mechavero alav haraya. They both say, again, Dinei Mamonis 101. If you want to extract money from a person, the burden of proof is upon the extractor. So therefore, if Reuven's animal comes into Shimon's field and consumes a row of produce, and we're not sure, what did he consume? What was it? What was it? So Lemaisa, again, in that situation, the most Reuven could be on the hook for is inferior produce. If Shimon wants to go and claim that he owes him superior produce, he could do that, that's fine, but he has to demonstrate that. He has to prove that. What's the case? I will say, so remember, we're trying to figure out according to Rabbi Shmuel, right? Rabbi Shmuel is of the opinion that that when we assess damages, we assess damages through the lens, the meitav, the best property of the damaged party. So, what is that case? What is that case? Here we go. What's the case here? Kigon is an interesting case. Shahaisa idis denizik kiziburis demazik. Here's the case, Rosa. The case is where the best property, of the damaged property of Shimon is like ultimately the inferior property of Reuven, right? So Reuven, the damager, has vaster holdings than Shimon, the damaged party, and the superior property of Shimon is only equivalent to the inferior property of Reuven, the damager. So let's say, here we go. Here's the machlokes. Rabbi Shmuel So Rabbi Shmuel says, at the end of the day, we assess damages through the lens of the damaged party. And therefore, now watch this, understand what that means. What that means, Reuven the damager is obligated to pay for damages, and he's obligated to pay for the damages through the best real estate. How do you establish best real estate? Rabbi Shmuel says, it's the best of the damaged party. So therefore, what comes out is like this. Let's say Reuven the damager is very wealthy. Very wealthy. And so it turns out that the damaged party's best produce, the damaged party's idis, is only equivalent to the damager's ziburis, inferior property. So in essence, the damager will pay with his inferior property because that is the equivalent of the damaged party's best property. That's Rabbi Shmuel. That's Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva says, not at all. Not at all. Damages, Rabbi say, again, at the end of the day, you're going to pay from idis, you're going to pay from best property. Whose best property? Whose best property? The damager. The damager. So Rabbi say, so herein lies the fundamental machlokes. Rabbi Shmuel telling us that when we assess, now remember, everyone is agreeing with the principle. What's the principle? That when you damage someone, if you are paying in real estate, and I will say, we're going to discuss, does the damager have a right to decide what he pays? And let's say I have cash and I have real estate, but I'd rather offload some land. So do I have the right to do that? So we'll discuss that in the halakha in just a little bit. But right now, everyone is agreeing with the principle. The principle is, when you damage someone and you are paying for damages in the form of real estate, you must pay from the quote-unquote best land. Best land. The machlokes is, how are you establishing best? Rabbi Shmuel says, it's established in accordance with the best of the damaged party's property, bidin isak shaminan, and Rabbi Akiva telling us, bidin mazik shaminan. Ultimately, again, it's established with the best property of the damager. Oh, so I'll say, so that is our fundamental machlokes. Good. So let's analyze it a bit more. My time is Rabbi Shmuel. What's Rabbi Shmuel's logic? Why does Rabbi Shmuel say that we assess damages through the best property of the damaged party? It's very simple. He says like this: Ne'amar sada lemata, v'ne'amar sada lema. We'll say it says sada twice in the pasuk. Ki yaver ish sada okerem. If a person will damage a field or a vineyard, and then at the end of the pasuk it says, meitav sadeu meitav karmel yishalim. You have to pay back. You have to pay back from the best field. So Rabbi Shmuel said like this: Mas sada ha'amr lemala dinizak. Just like the first sada in the pasuk, which is talking about the damage. It refers to the field of the damaged party. Sada Amar Lamata Dinizak. So to the Sada later on in the pasuk, which talks about payment, also refers to the field of the damaged part. That's Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva, natives said they ometiv kam yishalim, tehech to kam yishalim. Rabbi Akiva says, come on, I don't need to explain my position. My position is obvious. So I'll say, what does the Torah say? Torah says, pay back with your best field in your best vineyard. Who's it talking to? The person who damaged. So that's the machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel, ahani gzer shava, ahani krar. According to Rabbi Shmuel, the gzer shava, it's the gzer shava to hektish, which we have not really articulated what that gzer shava is yet. But Rabbi Shmuel says the gzer shava is helpful and the pasuk is helpful. We need both. Ahani gzer shava kedikamina. So ultimately, again, we need the gzer shava as was mentioned. That halacha l'maisa, that the damager pays in accordance with the best property of the damaged party. And even if it turns out that the damaged party's idis, best property, is equivalent to the ziburis, the inferior property of the damager has the ability to pay with ziburis. So that's ultimately a hanikra. And what does the pasuk help for? Hanikra kigon the islay lamazik idis is ziburis. Now watch this. I will say the pasuk helps in the following situation. The pasuk helps in a situation. Oh, thank you. Actually, when she can have that sheet, just need that for later. Thank you. Thank you. So the Gemara says as follows: Ahani kra, the pasuk is helpful. Kigon the islay. Listen to this. Kigon the islay lamasik idis is ziburis. I will say, watch this case. The mazik, the damager, has two types of property: idis and ziburis, which means superior and inferior. What is he lacking? Beinonis. Right? He's lacking like middle grade property. Now watch this. Now I will say to fully appreciate this. If you see there's like a little letter base there that takes you to the Hagos with unit. So take a quick look how to read this next line. He says, "This lay the mazik idis is ziburis. The idis the nizak, and the best property of the nizak lo shavye ki idis the mazik." So listen to this. This is an interesting case. So essentially, here's what we have. We have the following situation. So here, let's read it. Idis the ziburis the mazik lo shavye ki idis the nizak. So listen, I watch this. So imagine the following situation. Ruvain damages Shimon. It's actually really interesting. Ruvain damages Shimon. So we know, according to Rabbi Shmuel, so damager has to pay in accordance with the best property of the damaged party, right, of Shimon. So now imagine the following situation. Ruvain, the damager, has two categories of property, idis and ziburis. The problem is that Shimon, the damaged party, his idis does not align with Ruvain's idis, but yet at the same time, it's more valuable than Ruvain's ziburis. So in other words, I'm at a case over here where the damaged party does not have parallel property with the damager. So what do you do in that case? So in this case, the best property of the damaged party of Shimon is not worth as much as Ruvain's idis, but is worth more than Ruvain's ziburis. What do you pay for in that situation? This is incredible. The mishalim le'mimeitav didei, the lo matzi amar le ta at gabi miziburis, ala gabi meitav. So Rabbi Shmuel says in that case, you always get bumped up. In that case, you get bumped up and you don't get bumped down. So in this case over here, even though, remember, according to Rabbi Shmuel is saying is we look at the best property of the damaged party, and even though, again, the best property of the damaged party is worth less than the best property of the damager, but is worth more than his ziburis, in that case, we bump it up. And damager, you're going to have to pay from your best property, even though your best property is higher grade than the damaged party's best property. Okay, incredible. Rabbi Kiva says, Rabbi Kiva Omer, Lo ba'akasav al ligbos le'nizakim mina'idis, the chomer la'hekdish. So now we're going back to the original question as well. Rabbi Kiva said that ultimately, again, the pasuk is only coming to teach me that when we collect for damages from idis, and it's a kal v'chomer from hekdish. Not kal v'chomer l'hekdish. We'll say, what is this kal v'chomer from hekdish that we're talking about over here? So the Gemara says, Ilana, dinagach TORAH didan l'TORAH de hekdish. Say if you want to say, we're talking about a case where my ox gored an ox of hekdish. So we'll say, interesting halacha over here. Shara ehu am rachmana lo shar shal hektish. Actually, there's no liability for goring a shar shal hektish, which is interesting. Why? It's a scriptural technicality. The Torah speaks about that when it comes to goring, it talks about my ox, goring the ox of my fellow. My fellow means another person. What doesn't it mean? It doesn't refer to hektish, the Beis HaMikdash. So technically speaking, if your ox gores the ox of the Beis HaMikdash, there is no liability. Ella, rather, what has to be the case? Like this, it must be as follows. I pledge money to the Beis HaMikdash. I say I'm going to pay a money to the Beis HaMikdash. The asi gizbar v'shakil mi'idis. When the gizbar comes along and takes that money, he could take that money from idis. In other words, when I have to pay a debt to the Beis HaMikdash, the debt is collectible from best property. So it seems to be that's what Rabbi Akiva is saying. the Kal V'chomer is Rabbi Akiva is saying the same way that when you pay hektish, you have to pay from idis, so too, again, when you damage, you also pay from idis. To which the Gemara says, I don't understand. So the Gemara says, Lo yehe ela balchov. That doesn't make sense, because the truth is, if you pledge money to the Beis HaMikdash, that means the Beis HaMikdash is your creditor. Now we'll say, what's the halacha by creditor? Top of Zayin Amud Aleph 7a. Balchov bebenonis. Again, let's say we're going to learn all of these things. A balchov, in general, if you owe someone money, a creditor only has the right to collect from benonis property, from middle grade, not idis and not zivuris. So I don't understand why in the case of hektish, if I owe money to the Beis HaMikdash, that is a typical balchov case, right? That's just a creditor case. Why would the Beis HaMikdash be entitled to collect from idis? They should get ziburis. Sorry, benonis. Rabbi Akiva called balchov namin beidis. Maybe you'll say, or maybe Rabbi Akiva holds that in general, creditors collect from idis. Maybe that's true. Maybe John, they collect from idis. The Gemara says, no, that can't be. Ikala mifrach ma lebalchov shekein yafa kocho b'nezikin tomar behektish shora kocho b'nezikin. So I'll say, remember again, a typical balchov. Maybe if you want to say he collects from idis, that's because also a typical balchov is also able to collect from idis when it comes to damages. Hektish, remember again, has an eroded position when it comes to nezikin. Because as we just said before, if my ox damages an ox of hektish, what's the halacha? There's no liability on my part. The olams, so what's the case? We're just trying to figure out, when Rabbi Akiva says that when you damage someone, you always pay from idis, and it's a kal v'chomer from hektish. We're just trying to figure out what is that kal v'chomer from hektish that we're talking about. To which the Gemara says, the olam de nagach TORAH didan, the TORAH de hektish. Let's go back. Here we're talking about my ox. We'll say Zayin Amud Aleph 7a, 5 lines down. Li'olam dinagach TORAH didan TORAH de hektish. My ox gored an ox of hektish. But 1 second, we said before. But if my ox gores an ox of hektish, I should be exempt over there, right? Because when the Torah speaks about goring, it uses the lashon of shor re'ehu, the shore of my fellow, which would seem to exclude the shore of hektish from any liability. The Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva, like Rabbi Shimon Menas. Okay, we'll say another twist. Rabbi Akiva holds like Rabbi Shimon Menassi. The sign of Rabbi Shimon Menassi, Omer, shor shal hektish, shenogach, shor shal hedyot, that if you have a shor shal hektish, right, a hektish shor, that gored a regular person shor, pater. Ultimately, again, hektish is pater. Beis HaMikdash, as they say, the house always wins, right? So the nice the base, right, a shor shal hektish goes ahead and gores a regular person shor, no liability. However, shor shal hedyot, shenagach shor shal hektish, but I will say a regular person shor that goes ahead and damages a shor shal hektish, bein tam, bein muad, mishalim nezek shalim. Ultimately, again, whether it's a tam or whether it's a muad, you always pay nezek shalim. So I will say, this is a new shita. So Rav Shimon Menasya, I will say, says, again, in fact, the law is tilted just the opposite. Protects the Beis HaMikdash from liability. So a shor shal hektish gores another shor, no liability. But if you gore hektish, your shor gores hektish, you pay nezek shalim, complete damages. And I will say again, Rabbi Akiva's mosif not only complete damages, but what? Mina idis, neitov, right from the best. Okay, the Gemara says, Ihachi, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva, mimai debe edis denizag viziburis demazik plihi. So maybe Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva are not really arguing about do you evaluate damages based on the nizak or the mazik, but maybe maybe everyone agrees that halacha l'maisa, when evaluating damages, we always look at the idis of the damaged party. So what Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva arguing about? V'hacha beplukta di Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya v'Rabbanan kamiflagi. Maybe Rabbi will say the machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel is in the machlokes Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya and the Rabbanan about whether or not there is liability for hektish when hektish gores another shore, or for that matter, again, is there liability when I gore the shore of hektish? The Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva Sabak Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya, Rabbi Akiva is Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya, as we just said before, and therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, when you gore a shore of hektish, ultimately there is liability, complete liability, nezek shali, even for a first-time offender. Amina edis. Rabbi Shmuel Sabak Rabbanan, and Rabbi Shmuel holds like the Rabbanan. Like maybe that's what's going on over here. To which the Gemara says, no. Imkain my lo ba hakasov. But say, if that's the case, then remember again, why do you need the phrase of lo ba hakasov? Va'od ma kal v'chomer lehektish. Furthermore, again, what's the meaning or the profundity ultimately again of the kal v'chomer to hektish? Va'od ha'amar Ravashi tanya behedya. Furthermore, again, I will say, Ravashi quotes an explicit brisa. And what does the brisa say? Meitav sadeo, meitav kam ishalim. The pasuk says that when you damage, you have to pay from the best of your field and the best of your vineyard. And the Gemara says, the Brisa says, meitav sadeo shal nizak, or meitav karmo shal nizak. Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel holds the best of what? The best of the damaged party's field, the best of the damaged party's vineyard. Rabbi Akiva Omer, meitav sadeo shal mazik, or meitav karmo shal mazik. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, we measure by the best of the field of the damager and the best of the vineyard of the damagers. So I will say, so bottom line, halacha l'maisa, it is clear that the machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel is not about a shore of hektish. The machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel will say is that about a profound valuation for damages. So once again, Rabbi Shmuel holds, well, so just to be clear, right, I go in and I damage Reuven's field. Or, let's keep it simple. Reuven's ox comes and damages Shimon's ox, or damages Shimon's field. So now, let's just to be clear, there's $1,000 of damages, right? So now we have. So the question is now, Reuven is going to pay in real estate. So the halacha is that when you pay in real estate for damages, you have to pay meitav sadeu. That's the Torah. You have to pay from the best of the property. The shaila is who's best. Are we gauging this by? So Rabbi Shmuel will say, we look at the property portfolio of the damaged party, of the nizak, and whatever is his best grade of property, if Reuven is going to pay in real estate, that's the type of real estate he has to pay. So that's Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva says, no, it's referring to a damager. The damager, Reuven, if he's going to pay in real estate, he has to pay from the highest grade of his own personal property. That's machlokes. The halacha l'maisa I'll show you in just a little bit, but let's go a little bit right first. Rami le Abaye le Rava. So Abaye went ahead and contrasted, or I should say, brought a contradiction to Rava. Here we go. Ksiv meitav sadei u meitav kama yishalim. Meitav in midi achrin lo. So we'll say, the pasuk says that when you pay for damages in real estate, you're going to pay from the best of your field at the best of your vineyard. So we'll say, now what can you infer from here? Meitav, you only pay from the best, but midi achrini lo. But from nothing else. From nothing else. In other words, it sounds like here from damages, the only thing you pay with is the choicest, right? Right? You only pay right with the highest grade, and nothing less. Vatanya, but we learned. Vatanya Yoshiv. The pasuk says Yoshiv. Bal habar yishalim kesef. Yoshiv lebalav. So this is actually talking about by bar damages. The halacha is you have to pay back damages. Yoshiv. You shall return to the owner. So we learn from Yoshiv. L'rabos shava kesef vafilu subin. We'll say Yoshiv teaches us that even if you don't have great property, right, or great metaltalin for that matter, you pay with whatever you have. You pay with whatever you have. Afilu subin. I will say, subin is brand. Subin is brand. So I will say, so which one is it? So on one hand, you're telling me that damages always have to be paid with the best. And then on the other hand, you're telling me, Yoshiv teaches me, you pay with whatever you got. With whatever you got. So which one is it? So it's actually interesting. No question, it's not a contradiction. Kan midaito kan bal karchov. Shabbos say this is fascinating. So the Gemara says, so comes along the Gemara says like this. It's not a contradiction. It depends. If after damaging, the damager owns his responsibility, right, and just simply pays, he has the right to pay with anything. If, however, he refuses to pay and forces the damaged party to bring him to Beis Din, again, if you force the damaged party to bring you to Beis Din, then halacha l'maisa, you can only pay with the best property. What a fascinating distinction. In other words, if you make a mistake and you own it, we're just happy to let you clean up your mess and move on. And however you're going to pay, you pay. But if you're not going to own it and you force this process into Beis Din, then halacha l'maisa, we're kind of going to throw the book at you a little bit, and you're going to have to pay from the best property. What a fascinating. I will say, it's also such a tremendous Mosar Haskell in general in life. If you're willing to own your problems and you're willing to own your mistakes, the ability to fix them is much easier. Just own it, fix it, move on. If, however, again, you're unwilling to own your mistakes, and often as we do, we deflect. It's not me, it's not this, it's not a mistake, it's not my problem, I didn't do it, someone else did it. Then there comes a day of reckoning. And often that reckoning is much more painful and much more difficult. Own it, fix it, move on. But if, so to speak, you're brought to Beis Din, so to speak, for your misdeeds, so then the process of rectification becomes much more complicated. Such a Mosar Haskell. If something is broken in life, I make a mistake in life, as tempting as it is to run and to deflect, it's so much better just to acknowledge it, own it, fix it to the best degree possible, and then move on. Gemara goes weiter. Amra ula breid Rav Eli, dekanami. We could also see a diak for this. Dechsev yishalim. The pasuk says yishalim. When the Torah speaks about paying from the best property, he used lashon yishalim. I will say the Gemara says something yishalim means bal karcho. That ultimately, again, you have to pay. Which makes it sound like you're being brought to Beis Din. So when do you have to pay best property? When you're brought to Beis Din. Amar Abaye, mi ksev yishulam. Does it say yishulam? Yishalim mi daitamash. Not true. The lashon of yishalim could actually mean you're being compelled, but it could also mean you're paying on your own. So the pasuk itself, you can't necessarily be medayik. Ela Amar Abaye, kidimar desanya. Listen to this. So again, I just want to point out what the Gemara is highlighting over here is as follows. We have a problem. What's our problem? Our problem is we have one pasuk that says "meit sadeo meit of karma yishalim," which tells me that when I'm paying for damages, I always have to pay from the best of my property. Then I have another drasha that says yashiv. You have to return damages to the owner, which makes it sound like what? I can pay with what? Anything, even if it's not the best. So how do I reconcile that? So attempt number one was it depends. Are you owning it? Are you acknowledging guilt and moving on? If you're acknowledging guilt, pay whatever you want. Not pay whatever you want, supposed to understand. In other words, you have to pay the amount, but pay with whatever you want and move on. Versus if you have to be dragged to court, then Lamaisa, we're going to throw the book at you and you have to pay with meitov. So Abayi now gives a different. Elamar Abayi, Kidemar, Desanyo, listen to this. Listen to this. Let's say I will say Ruvain the damager has a portfolio. He has homes, he has fields, he has vineyards. Ve'ina motzi la'mochra. And I will say this happens to be talking about over here, not damages. This is talking about meiser ani. So remember again, at what point, it's actually an interesting halacha. How much money, in other words, what's the threshold for being disqualified from meiser ani, leked, shichacha, peya? In other words, how much money do you have to have in order to be disqualified for any of these gifts from the poor? So we'll say the halacha is if you have 2,000 zuz. If you have 2,000 zuz to your name, you are not allowed to partake of any of the gifts to the poor. If you have less than 2,000 zuz, then halacha l'maaseh you're eligible. Essentially, you're eligible for government assistance. That's pretty much what it is. Less than 2,000 zuz, you are eligible for the programs that halacha allows. Ma'aser ani, leket, shichacha, peah. Now, watch this interesting case. What happens if a person, essentially, I will say, is cash poor, but asset rich? So, for example, he says, well, not rich, but harishahayilo batim, sados ukramim, ve'ina motzi lemochran. So we'll say, watch this. Let's say I have property, but right now I'm unable to sell them. I can't find a buyer. So in other words, I have assets that I could sell, but I can't sell them now. So as such, again, it's an interesting case where if you look at like my balance sheet looks good. I have assets, but I have no money. So what do you do in a case like this? So I will say in this kind of case, we'll allow him to go ahead and participate in Ma'aser Ani programs, Ma'aser Ani like a sheikh, up to 1,000 zuz. So we're going to cap him. We're going to give him a 1,000 zuz allowance for Ani programs, but we're going to cap him at that. So Mar asked about this. I don't understand. Hey Chidami, what's the case here? I hozol ara dukuli amo v'didi nami zal bahadayu afil tuva nami lisvi dehazol dukuli amo nami. So what are we talking about? If the real estate market in general is depressed, if that's what we're talking about over here, so just the asset is not worth as much as it once was, then everyone has that problem. Then this guy is a legitimate ani. Right, he's legitimate ani. If he's legitimate ani, then he should not be capped at 1,000 zuz allowance. He should be able to take regular maknos aniyim. Ella the okir are also the kuli amal. Listen to this. No, rather it's just the opposite. The real estate market is doing great. Real estate has appreciated. Vididi id the aisle v'nofek azuz zil ra. This is interesting. We're talking about a case over here where the real estate market is great. What's the problem? This guy, we'll call him Ruvain, is trying desperately to sell property. I'll say, what happens in the real estate market when you try desperately to sell property? What happens, right? The vultures circle, and they see that you're desperate. So what does that do? You're going to get much less than market value. That's the case over here. Amadeus, afilu porta damilo lisvulei. So I'll say, if that's the case, then lamaisa, and the property is sellable. Granted, maybe it's sellable only at a discount. He shouldn't be entitled to any maknos aniyim. I was well saying, what are we talking about over here? If we're talking about a case where he has holdings, but the real estate market is terrible right now, so his property is worth very little. So that's not just his problem; that's everyone's problem. In that case, he's a legitimate ani. If the case over here is that halacha l'maisa, no, the real estate market is great. The real estate market is great. The problem is this guy, because he's trying to sell off property, people see that, and they're only willing to offer him under market. So look, that's kind of a little bit his problem. He has money, and therefore he shouldn't be entitled to go ahead and collect anything from maknos aniyim. What's fascinating? Timiyome Nisan Yikra Arasa, Ubiyome Tishrei Zil Arasa. I'll say, what's the case? The case is, this is agricultural land. It's agricultural land, I will say. In Nisan has an appreciated value, right? Because remember, again, Nisan is going to be harvest season. So Nisan represents land with its crops, right? Fully grown in. So the land is more expensive in Nisan. Ubiyome Tishrei Zil Arasa. But in Tishrei, ultimately, again, it's a lower price. It's a lower price. Because what's Tishrei? First of all, Tishrei, right, again, the fields are empty, right? And then once again, they have to be plowed. Everything has to be done again for the next agricultural cycle. Now watch this. The Kuli Alma, Natri Ad Nisan. I will say, so now in general, what do people do? People wait until Nisan to sell their property. So in general, like conventional wisdom is, agricultural land, hold it until Nisan and sell it then. The high, hoil v'tzricha lezuze zavin kedahash. Rabbi said, what happens? This guy, Ruvain, he needs money now. But because he needs money now, what is he going to do? He's going to go ahead and sell off the property now in Tishrei at a depreciated value. Rashi says over here, Zabin Kidahashta, Rashi says, "B'tishrei mishum de'itzrich lezuzeh hilchach ani lo havi de'ital shave elef dinar hoil ubiyomi nisan shavos karka osav marsayim v'asher lo havi." Shabbos say, now let me tell you this is outside. Therefore, Shabbos says it's an interesting case. So therefore, Ruvain, who has a field that is worth money. So what does Ruvain really need to do in an ideal world? What does he need to do? Hold until Nisan. The problem is he can't. He can't. He really needs to sell now because he needs the cash. So this is a good example. We'll say of a guy who will give an allowance of up to 1,000 zuz to collect from matnos aniyim. Right? Why? Because on one hand, halacha l'mayis, he's not a complete ani. Why is he not a complete ani? Because he has an asset that is actually worth a good amount of money. On the other hand, we don't look at him as actually possessing 2,000 zuz. Why not? Because since he needs to sell it now, it's going to be sold at a deep discount. So therefore, what do we allow him to do? If he is indeed presently cash poor, even though he's sitting on an asset, because he's going to sell that asset at a loss, we give him up to 1,000 zuz credit from matnos aniyim. Incredible. So the Gemara says, "Ad palga orchei lemezal." So we'll say it is common when a person sells property at a discount. Often they'll discount it up to 50%. Tzvi lav orchei lemezal, but a person is not going to discount the property more than 50%. So the Gemara says, "V'hachana bigabi nizakin dine bi'idis." And so too over here by nizakin halacha l'maisa, we would also pay in accordance with idis. Now we'll say, now what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi is right across. V'hachana bigabi nizakin nami b'hachi mitarzu kroiki going to biyomi nisan yikra arasa ubiyomi tishrei zol v'hizik bit tishrei shavet mana uba likbos mana mikakos hamasik vidino ki idis kidichsev meitav. So now watch this. So imagine the following scenario right now, right? So halacha l'maisa, Ruvain damages Shimon. Now we'll see if we just go to Rabbi Akiva, that ultimately again we go with the mazik shaminan, right? We go ahead and we evaluate with the damages property. So we'll say, so now it's Tishrei. So Ruvain has certain land that's worth X now in Tishrei, but it'll be worth X plus Y in Nisan. So the Gemara says, "V'hachanami gabi nizikin dine be'idis." Listen to this. V'i amarle ihu havli benonis tfei porta. So we'll say, now watch this. So now, imagine the following situation. So Ruvain damages Shimon. Okay, $1,000 of damages. So now Ruvain is going to pay in real estate. Ruvain's going to pay in real estate. But now remember again, Ruvain's idis property is worth much less now, right? Why is it worth much less? Because it's Tishrei. So we'll say, so now watch this. So Shimon says, listen, let's do this. Havli benonis tfei porta. Let's do this. Instead of me collecting from your idis property, give me a little bit more benonis, and we'll call it even. So normally Ruvain could say, Ish shaklis kidinach shakal kidahashta. Listen, if you're willing, right? If you want to take now, take in accordance with what you're entitled to now. V'ilo, but if not, shakal kidiyukad l'kamei. Then ultimately, again, take in accordance with what is in front of you now. In other words, that halacha l'maisa, or take in accordance with what will be in this later on. So we'll say, so what he's saying over here is like this, that halacha l'maisa, that Shimon, the damaged party, doesn't really have the ability to go ahead and negotiate anything. In other words, if you look at Rashi says, shakal ki zol dahashta, either take in accordance with present values. Rashi says, nizak, havli mi benonis kidahashta tvei parta mimai debaz lemesivli beidis lo matzil michviye elo amrle mazik shaklis beidis kidinach shakal kiyashta veilo shakal mi benonis kidiyukra dilakame. So we'll say, now listen to this. So the damaged party, the damager Reuben has the ability to do this. If you want this, you take idis based on what it is right now, right? Even though, remember again, Reuven's idis is depressed, right? It's a depressed value because it's Tishrei. So if you want idis, I'm happy to give you idis right now. That's what you're entitled to. If you want Beinonis, I'll give you Beinonis, but it's going to be Beinonis in accordance with what? Nissan prices. So I'll give you Beinonis at Nissan prices, or idis presently at depressed prices. That's the options on the table. Now, both say, now, why does the damager have the right to negotiate that? Because remember, again, what the damager owes the damaged party is idis. I'm sorry that it's Tishrei and my idis is depressed, but this is what it is. This is what I'm going to pay you. This is what I'll give you. Right? But Lamaisa, if you'd rather take Beinonis, I'm happy to renegotiate, but I'm going to give you Beinonis now based on Nissan valuations, which of course will allow the damager to pay less Beinonis presently than he would have to otherwise. Okay, so that's they can work out. So the basket for Rav Bar Yaakov. Rav Bar Yaakov says, one second. Im kain harasa kol choshan lezikin. So the Gemara says, Eitzel Beinonis v'ziburis. Here's the problem. Rav Bar Yaakov says, if that's the case, that halacha l'maisa, what you've essentially done is you've eroded the power of collection of damages. You've relegated to a case only of Beinonis and Ziburis. To which the Gemara says, Rachmana Amar Meitav v'at amrit mi Beinonis v'Ziburis namilos. To which the Gemara says, because the Torah says you have to pay from Meitav. And here again, you're negotiating when it comes to Beinonis and Ziburis. Elam Rav Bar Yaakov i'ika l'temuye lebalchov midamina le balchov dina bebeinonis. The Amarle Havli Ziburis Tvei Porta. So I say that. I'm sorry. Let me start for just this. The Gemara is like this. Rav Yaakov says you're right. If you want to compare this case to anything, to the Nezikin case, you could compare it to Balchov. We'll say what's the halacha by Balchov? Balchov Tina bebeinonis. A Balchov the halacha is he collects from beinonis. We'll say you saw that on the top of Amud Aleph. A Balchov goes ahead and collects from beinonis. Vi Amarle Havli Ziburis Tvei Porta. Now listen. Watch this. Let's say Reuven lends Shimon money. Right? So now Shimon owes Reuven $10,000. So what happens? Shimon doesn't have money. Reuven is going to collect from land. What type of land does Reuven have the right to collect from when it comes to a debt? Beinonis. Now watch this. What if Reuven says to Shimon, listen, here's the deal. Havli Ziburis Tvei Porta. You know what? Here's what I'm going to do. Instead of giving me Beinonis, why don't you go ahead and give me a little bit more Ziburis? In other words, I'll collect from Ziburis, but add on a little bit. So in other words, Reuven's lending is mutually beneficial. Mutually beneficial that I'm taking lower grade property off your hands. Vice is beneficial to you. And beneficial to me is that I'm going to get a little more than I would have otherwise been entitled to. So can you make such a deal like that? Amar Lei, so the borrower could say, listen, listen, you're entitled to Beinonis. If you want to take Beinonis as its value now. But remember again, it's all going in the agricultural case where property is worth less in Tishrei and worth more in Nisan. So the borrower could say to Reuven, listen, if you want to take your Beinonis, take it right now. And in accordance with the value it has now. V'ilo shakul kiyukad will come. And if you want to take Ziburis, I'll work that out with you, but here's the deal. I'm going to give you Ziburis at Nisan valuations. And they have the ability to make such an arrangement. If that's the case, I will say you run the risk of literally closing the door in front of lenders. Meaning that people aren't going to want to lend money if they run the risk of getting paid back with inferior or even with middle grade property at depressed prices. Because he could have said, Ilo haveli zuzi, have shakl kidahashta. Ultimately, again, if I had money, I'd be able to buy in accordance with current prices. Hashta de zuzi gabach, ash kiyukrid l'kameh. But now that you have my money, I have to buy ziburis at Nissan prices. That doesn't make any sense. Otherwise, I will say, one of the things in general that we have to do in order to facilitate an open loan market is to make the terms of repayment beneficial to the lender. The problem is, under what we describe, the lender himself is actually at a disadvantage. Because if he wants a little bit more ziburis, he can get that, but the borrower has the right to say, take ziburis at Nissan prices. You're right. If you want to compare Nezikin to a case, you have to compare it to a case of Ksuvas Isha. We'll say, what's the case of Ksuvas Isha? Listen to this. The Ksuvas Isha Dina Biziburis. We'll say in general, a ksuva is payable. Right? When a husband pays his wife, she has the right to collect from Ziburis property. Vi amrale ihi havli beinunes betzir porta. So let's, again, Reuven is divorcing Rachel. And Rachel says, listen, I want to collect my ksuva, and here's what I'd like to do. give me beinonis, and I'll take a little less. In other words, instead of me collecting the full amount from ziburis, give me beinonis at a little less. I'll take beinonis at a discount. Take beinonis at a discount. So Amar Allah, he could say to her, listen, listen, I'm willing to pay you ziburis, right? I'm willing to pay you ziburis, and again, ziburis in its current valuation right now. Ve'ilo, if you want beinonis, I'm happy to arrange that with you, but shakli kidiyukra dilakam. You have to take it at Nissan prices. At Nissan prices. Mikal makom kasha. Never so say again, we have a problem. Omarava koldi you have lemi meitav. Leisavle. Vahameit sadeu ki ksir. So we'll say, so in general, remember, what is our problem, right? What's driving all of this? What's driving all this, we'll say, is that halacha we seem to have two competing psukim. On one hand, the Torah tells us that you have to repay from meitav, right, from the best property. And the Torah is also telling us yashiv, which you could pay from anything. So which one is it? Or do you have to pay from the best or not pay from the best? We'll say first white line, Ella, Kiyasar Papa of Rafuna Braid Rabbi Yoshua, Mibei Rav, Pershua, Kol Mili Meitafu. So we'll say this is incredible. I will say this is really fascinating and quite riveting. The Gemara says like this: the concept of meitav only applies to real property. Only real property has gradations of, idis, beinonis, ziburis. Metaltal, immovable property, is always considered to be meitav. Right? Why? This is fascinating. Why? The ilo mizdabin hacha, mizdabin b'masa achrisi. Because I will say there is always a market for movable property. And even if you can't sell it here, you sell it in a different city. So we'll say, isn't this fascinating? So literally what the Gemara is saying is like this. Yashiv teaches me that you could even repay damages with movable property. Right? And what it's saying is, what about meitav? What about meitav? Meitav's telling you that whatever you repay with always has to be the best. But now best is relative. When it comes to real estate, so real estate again has these three categories of idis, beinonis, ziburis. Real property, listen to this, is always called meitav. Fascinating, no? Why? Because it's always a market for real property. If you can't sell it here, you'll sell it somewhere else. Right? Mizdabin b'masachrisa lebar me'ara deleisav le'mi meitav ki hechi delikpos alei zibino. When it comes to real property, I will say, however, you have to go ahead and give meitav, give the best property. Why? I will say, because what we don't want is, if you're paying in land, we want that property to be very quickly sellable. Right? We want it to be transformable into cash relatively easy. It is easier to sell a piece of this property than it is to sell a piece of this or zibur property. We'll say, even though the value is the same, there are more buyers for it. So we'll say, so therefore, halacha l'mais, what the Gemara suggests is as follows. The halacha is, you have to pay from meitav. Whenever you pay damages, you have to pay from meitav. What's the definition of meitav? So, right, you always have to pay from the best. What's the definition of the best? So, when it comes to real estate, the definition of the best is idis. Idis. And why idis? Because idis is a type of property that you could sell fastest on the open market. When it comes to movable property, I will say all property is considered to be meitav. Why? Because there's always a market for movable property. If it's not here, then it's somewhere else. So I also just want to end off. So now we finished the sugya. Shkoya. What about the machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel? So how do we pass when it comes to damages? Right? So we know we're paying idis. Do you pay idis from the mazik or idis of the nizek? Listen to this. The Shulchan Aruch in Choshen Mishpat Siman Taf Yotet. So actually, I will say, what we'll do? We'll stop over for today. I'll pick up with this halacha in Hashem tomorrow, because it's actually quite fascinating. And here also we'll say the worlds of metaltalin and karka will Hashem collide, as well as the resolution of Machlokes Rabbi Akiva. Shkoyach.